Hello, Crafty Crandall here, and today I want to discuss all of the books that I've read so far in 2020. Prior to starting my channel, I've read 14 books so far in 2020, so today I just wanted to discuss what those were, how I felt about them, my thoughts, and just to give you kind of an insight into my reading tastes and what I've read thus far. 2020 has been a year of a lot of series reading for me. So I have gone through several series and either finished or caught up with the series and have other series that I'm kind of in progress with. So I just want to go through those with you today. The first series that I started actually in December of 2019 is the Red Rising series. So the original Red Rising trilogy, and then I carried on with the two following books that we have thus far. Red Rising by Pierce Brown is a sci-fi series that is kind of a utopian society, kind of a dystopian society really, wherein there is like a specific class structure of people based on different colors. So the reds are the lowest people in the society, the golds are the highest people in society, and the colors range from there. And so in the beginning of the series, we are following Darrow, who is a red man, just, living his life, etc., until one day something happens, and he ends up finding an opportunity to kind of undergo a metamorphism into becoming a gold and reestablishing himself in gold society for the purpose of essentially spying for the Red Rebellion. So that's the premise of at least the first book. It carries on from there in a series of different events, and honestly, I really enjoyed this entire series so far. So the 4 books that I have read in 2020 are Golden Sun, the second book, Morning Star, the third book, Iron Gold, the 4th book, which actually carries on, I think, 20 years later. 10 years later after the end of Morning Star. So there is a gap of time there in between. So this is kind of, as I understand it, a separate trilogy from the original 3, but it's still following Darrow, and it actually adds other perspectives. So this is the first book where we get like a multiple perspective look at other characters, and I really liked how that kind of transitioned. I really liked the side characters, and the following book, Dark Age, does the same. So I really enjoyed, reading from other people's perspectives other than Darrow, and I thought that it gave the books a lot of depth. The second trilogy is a lot longer books, and a lot happens in these books, and I think that they took me so much longer to read. I mean, honestly, I think I was reading Dark Age for maybe a whole month. Because this book is just massive. And I don't know about you, so this is about 750 pages here, but I am slow at reading science fiction. I like science fiction, but I find it a lot slower to read, at least for me, than a fantasy novel. I think it's just because it's more scientific. There tends to be a lot more like math and science related content, and as an engineer I can appreciate that, but it does make it harder to read. So that's one thing to note if you're going into these. They are very good, and the plot keeps moving. It's very dynamic and scintillating, but it probably will take longer to read. The next books that I have on my list that I read after I had finished catching up on the Red Rising series are actually 2 more science fiction books. This is the most science fiction I have read ever. And honestly, I've really enjoyed it, so I think I am going to endeavor to pick up more science fiction. But the books were Dark Matter and Recursion by Blake Crouch. Now, I had heard these kind of touted in the Goodreads reading awards. I think Recursion either won or came in second in its award category, so I wanted to pick it up. But I realized that I would probably be better served if I picked up Dark Matter first, so I did that. And can I just say, this book was so good, but so out there. I think that it was really well done, and I really liked how this book kind of took a concept that we're all pretty familiar with and made it into like a realism that could be a potential. So Dark Matter is essentially about this gentleman who finds himself kidnapped and then finds himself in sort of a parallel universe, if you will. So essentially this book is following this guy trying to figure out what happened to him and how he can return to his alternate timeline where he originally was. And it's really interesting. The concepts are really well explored, and I think that Blake Crouch did a great job with it. Similarly, Recursion like blew my mind in the same way. This book is completely different. It follows a cop who is essentially like reevaluating some events that had happened in his past, and he finds himself teaming up with this woman to try to sort out some issues that they're having. I know that's a terrible description, but really, the less you know about these books going into them, the better they're going to be. And so I don't know how to enunciate what happens as well as I'd like to, but B, also don't really want to, because I just want you to read this book and be as thoroughly mind blown as I was. So highly recommend you pick these up. They were fantastic. I think I gave them both a 4 to 4.5 stars. Definitely recommend. The next books that I picked up were a lot lighter. So after all of that science fiction, I really just needed something simple to read and like a light continuation, because I felt that I had been taking way too long on all of the books that I've been reading and was really kind of just falling behind with where I thought I should be as far as my reading year. And so I ended up picking up Graceling by Kristin Cashore. Now, I don't know how I missed this series when I was a teenager. I had heard of it, obviously. I think pretty much everyone had, but I always glanced over it and just wasn't interested. Now, I think that might be because the old covers for these novels admittedly weren't that interesting to me. And yes, I know judging a book by its cover is not good, but I'm honestly pretty sure that's what happened when I was a teenager. I never reached for these, I never bought them, and so I never read them. But we fixed that now. I picked these up, and let me tell you, Graceling was exactly what I needed. It was such a fast read. I think I read this in like 3 days, and I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with Katza and Poe, the main characters, and I would highly recommend, if you haven't read this and you are interested in just a light, easy to read fantasy with relatable and likable characters and a world that is not at all complex and pretty easy to understand, that you pick this up. Essentially, Graceling is referring to this race of people who have special abilities. So the way that you mark a Graceling is from their eye colors. They've got 2 distinct eye colors. And so Katza, our main character, is graced, at first we think, with fighting. So she's portrayed to us as a Graceling fighter, and she is essentially the niece of the presiding ruler of one portion of this kingdom. And from there, she ends up going on a mission to save this captive man, and ends up running into our other main characters from there in the ensuing events. Now, I will say, like I said, this world is pretty simplistic. There wasn't a lot of like world building in this, and it could have been better in that regard. Like if this were an adult fantasy, I would have expected way more world building and just a lot more depth to it. But honestly, without that, it was still good. I really liked the characters in this book and thought that it was very well done for a first novel in the series. Now, that said, after that, I immediately went to Fire and was immediately put off a little bit by Fire because of that lack of world building that I mentioned earlier. Now, Fire takes place in a section of the realm that the people in Katza's world don't know about. So it just seemed like we were in two completely different worlds that hadn't been discussed, and I didn't understand how these books fit together. Now, that is obviously explored later on, and we end up finding out, but for the entirety of Fire, I didn't quite understand what was going on. So whilst I liked the characters of Fire and I appreciated, you know, the same light fluffiness that went on in Graceling, it left a bad taste in my mouth in that you don't find out what's going on really until, I wouldn't even say until the end. You kind of read this and you're like, huh, I'm not sure what just happened, but now I need to pick up Bitter Blue to find out. So the third book, Bitter Blue, was kind of a culmination of both the worlds. Bitter Blue is a character who we actually meet in Graceling, so it kind of brings it full circle in that regard, and you know that going in because the name of this novel is Bitter Blue. So even after completing Fire, I knew that I would have to come back to the world we were used to in Bitter Blue. So that was why I continued to read, even though I was a little off-put by Fire. Now, having said that, Bitter Blue as a character bothered me. So I didn't love her as a character, but I did appreciate the fact that we could be back in a world that we knew and just kind of see how she approached all of her problems, as she is currently the ruler of her kingdom, queendom in this case, and we kind of follow her through that journey. Now at the end of this book, we do actually get back into the world of Fire. So it does bring them full circle, but the way that it did it, I felt like it needed to do it a lot sooner. I mean, this book is how long? Like 500 pages, 550 pages long. It's not until like the last maybe 75 to 100 pages that they come back together and we kind of see how these worlds fit. And it just didn't leave me enough time to really process the information. So I think if there had been like a continuation of this series, that would have been better. If there is one upcoming that you know about, please let me know. I'm not aware of one. Or if there is already one and I just haven't seen it, I'd be very interested to read it. But to my knowledge, there isn't, and that was one thing I disliked about Bitter Blue. But overall, like I said, the series is easy to read, has fun characters for the most part, and I really like the concept of Gracelings and like the world that they're in. I just wish that it had had a little bit more to it. The next book that I read was actually a reread for me, and I've talked a bit about this on my channel already, but this is The Warrior Heir by Cinda Chima. In 2019, I actually read Cinda Chima's other two series, the Demon King series and the Flamecaster series. I know that they've got other names like the Seven Realms books, but I read those two series, absolutely loved them. Every single one of those books, phenomenal. So I wanted to go back because my first experience with Cinda Chima was actually The Warrior Heir. And I had read it when I was like 15, 14, I don't remember exactly when, but I remember that I liked it, but had found it a little bit difficult to read at the time. Like her writing style wasn't something that I was used to at the time, and so I struggled and took a long time to read this relatively short book. But I wanted to reapproach it as an adult, having read those other series and really loving them, to see if I would like this more as an adult. And I did. I did like it more as an adult. It went way faster because I've become a better reader in that amount of time. And although I don't love the main character, Jack, I think that this book was very good. So this book follows a teenage boy who is named Jack, and he is actually a wizard. However, he was taken in at birth by his guardian and had his body transformed in such a way that he actually became a warrior. So the way that it works is the 5 magical beings in this novel series are all made such by a stone that they have. So Jack was essentially born without his stone. They put in the wrong stone as kind of an experiment so that he could then be later used for kind of a political plot. Now, I really liked how this book went down. Obviously, I had already read it, so I knew what was going to happen, but the other main character, Ellen, is one of my favorite characters, and I kind of liked how this book concluded. So I am currently finishing some of the other books in the series. I am currently reading The Warrior Heir, which if you saw my my update videos for the Reading Rush, you'll know about that. And then I do also have The Enchanter Heir on my shelves and plan to pick up the other books as well. The next book that I read was completely different from any of the other books that I've currently read this year, and that was My Dark Vanessa. I don't honestly even remember who the author is. Kate Elizabeth Russell, I think. So I had heard Emma Books review that book, and she absolutely loved it, and it sounded like an interesting concept to me, so I wanted to read it too. I'm not going to go into depth on my thoughts on this book, but I would just like to say I think that book could have been half as long and twice as effective. I did not enjoy this book. I've actually already de-hauled it, which is why I don't even have it here anymore. But I figured, you know, it's a new release, someone else might enjoy reading it more than I did, and so I just wanted to give it away so that they could do that and I didn't have to look at it on my shelf anymore, knowing that I just didn't enjoy it and wasn't going to read it again. So that's all I'm going to say about it. You can read my review if you want to hear more of my thoughts on Goodreads. Alright, the next and final series that I was reading this year was the Ember and the Ashes series by Sabaa Tahir. Now, I absolutely loved this book. I have completely caught up with the series thus far, so I read An Ember in the Ashes, A Torch Against the Night, and A Reaper at the Gates, which I read on my e-reader because I couldn't find it at any of our local bookstores and didn't want to order it online. But I thought that this series was really well done. Again, this is another series that I had heard about and never bothered picking up despite all of the hype, but I'm really glad that I finally decided to pick it up because I really like it. So we've got two main characters in this book, Leia, who is a scholar, which is kind of like the slave or underling race in this society, and then we've got Elias, who is a marshal, which is the top race in this society. Elias was honestly a much more interesting character to me than Leia, but the book follows primarily Leia's journey. I really also liked Helene. Helene is the other main character who gains a perspective once we get to A Torch Against the Night, but for this first book it was just Leia and Elias. And so basically we're following Leia, who is kind of undergoing some trials to get her brother out of prison after the beginning of the book. And then Elias, who is kind of wrestling with his identity. He doesn't really want to be a marshal, but he's being forced to undergo a series of trials to end up potentially becoming the emperor of the martial race. So he is wrestling with that. Leia is wrestling with her struggles, and it just culminates into this really intricate, really fun plot. And although, again, I think that the world building could have used a lot of help, I did really enjoy the character-driven nature of these stories and thought that it worked really well. Like I said, Helene was really my favorite character. That continued throughout the novels, although in A Reaper Against the Gates, I felt like she could have done a lot better. It disappointed me that she was originally portrayed as such a strong character, and then that strength kind of diminished throughout the novels. And I guess I was really disappointed by that. But I'm hopeful that in the fourth novel she regains this strength and kind of comes back into herself and overcomes her challenges a little bit better than she managed to in A Reaper Against the Gates. So again, really loved this series. Cannot wait for the fourth book. I will absolutely be picking it up when it comes out. And that is all I have for you as far as a wrap up of my 2020 reading thus far. So I think I'm doing a pretty good job. I'm about halfway through my Goodreads goal, which is admittedly much lower than most booktubers, but that's okay. I don't care. I just want to talk about books regardless of how many I actually read. So there you have it. Please leave your thoughts down below on any of these books that you've read or want to read. I would be curious to know your thoughts. Also, please feel free to like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel as I post videos here every week. Thanks so much. Have a good one. Bye.